Nobody comes back from that valley, not in 1 hour, not ever. Sergeant First Class DeLand Prosper said it to a room of 11 people, and every one of them heard it, and that was the point. He said it with his hands flat on the briefing table, leaning over the map like a man delivering a verdict. The valley on that map was a long, crooked scar cut into the high desert east of the outpost. 16 kilometers of dry wash and shale and burned-out village. And the drone footage on the wall showed exactly nothing useful because the drone had been shot down 40 minutes earlier, and the last clear frame was a smear of rock. At the back of the room, a corporal named Novak sat with her hands folded and did not move. She did not shift in her chair. She did not look up. She had heard the shape of that sentence before, from other men in other rooms, and she had learned that the shape of it never changed, and neither did the answer. What changed was only how long it took the room to find out. Prosper straightened. He was a big man with a voice built for open ground, and he had spent 19 years being right often enough that he had stopped checking. "Sir," he said to the captain at the end of the table, "we push a team into that valley in daylight. We're pushing them into a shooting gallery. Whoever's on that ridge has range on the whole floor. It's a math problem, and the math says no." Captain Reuben Adeyemi did not answer right away. He was looking at the smeared frame on the wall. What the room did not know, what the audience already does, is that the answer to the captain's math problem was sitting in the last row with her hands folded, and that in 94 minutes she would be lying in a shale seam 1,100 meters from a target while a man who had never once said her name asked her for it over an open net. And what nobody in that room could have predicted was the shot at the end, not the distance of it. The distance was the easy part. If you like stories where the person everyone counted out turns out to be the only answer in the building, subscribe, because this is what this channel does. Drop the name of your city in the comments. I read everyone, and I want to know how far this one travels. And stay to the end. The last 4 minutes of this story contain a thing that happened on a cliff face in near total dark. And when you hear how it was proved afterward, you are going to sit back in your chair. Now rewind. Combat Outpost. Rel sat on a shelf of broken rock at 1,900 meters, and the wind came off the plateau in the afternoon like something with a grudge. Everything at Rel was the color of the ground. The sandbags, the tents, the men's faces, after a week. The air was thin enough that new arrivals spent their first 3 days breathing through their mouths. Novak had arrived 4 months ago, and nobody remembered it happening. She was 5'3", and she carried a rifle longer than she was comfortable admitting. And the first thing men noticed about her was that she did not fill a doorway. The second thing they noticed, if they were paying attention, was that she never adjusted anything twice. She set a thing down where she wanted it, and it stayed there. Her file said she had come out of the marksmanship section at Fort Benning with a score they had checked twice. Her file did not say why. The why was a woman named Odile Fanucci, who was 51 years old and very much alive, and who ran a 2-lane indoor range in Duluth with a bad hip and a worse temper. Odile had shot for the national team in her 20s and had been beaten by a man who cheated on the wind call and never got over it. She had taken Isel on at 14 because Isel's mother worked nights and the range was warm. She had taught her nothing gentle. "You're aiming," Odile would say, and slap the bench beside her elbow hard enough to make the whole line flinch. "Aiming is a wish. Stop wishing." There was no philosophy in it, Odile did not believe in stillness as a virtue or breath as a prayer. She believed in numbers and in repetition and in being angry at your own hands until they behaved. She had made Iselle shoot 400 rounds a week for 6 years, and she had made her call every miss out loud before the scope told her. And if the call was wrong, she made her do it again with no rounds in the magazine, dry for an hour until the call was right. The gift is a liar, Odile told her once. The gift shows up on good days. Build something that shows up on bad ones. That was the whole of it. No aphorism about listening to the mountain. No worn object pressed to the chest. Iselle carried nothing of Odile's except a habit. She called every shot aloud before she looked, always, even alone, even in her head, and she had never once broken it. They still talked. Odile sent letters, actual paper, 4 or 5 a year, and they were mostly complaints about her hip and about the range's new lighting. The last one had ended with a single line that Iselle had read 11 times. "You're better than I was. Don't waste it on people who need to be told." She had not told anyone at Rel any of this. Nobody asked. What they did instead was give her the ammunition inventory. It was Prosper who arranged it, in the way these things get arranged. Not an order, just a suggestion made loudly at the right moment, and then it was hers. 3 days a week, she counted rounds in a Conex box that held heat like an oven. Prosper would stop by sometimes on his way past. "Novak," he'd say, "how's the war?" And the men with him would laugh, and Iselle would write a number in a column and keep counting. He was not stupid, and he was not incompetent. That was the part that made it worse. DeLand Prosper had 4 combat deployments and a reputation for bringing people home, and when he ran a patrol, he ran it clean. His dismissal of her was not ignorance. It was a decision he made fresh every morning, and he made it in front of people, because a thing said in front of people becomes true faster. Captain Adeyemi heard it. That was the other thing. He heard it in the chow line, and he heard it at the vehicle bay. And he said nothing, because Prosper was his best senior NCO, and because saying something would have cost him a week of friction he did not want to spend. He told himself it was harmless. He would think about that later, on a night when the net went quiet, and he would find that he could not make the word harmless fit in his mouth anymore. There was one man at Rel who looked at her twice. Specialist Toma Byrne ran the Outpost's water point and was 19 and talked constantly and had no filter whatsoever. He watched her one afternoon at the improvised zero range they'd scratched into the hillside, where she was doing something with a rifle that he did not have the vocabulary for. She fired once. She wrote in a small book. She waited about 6 minutes, doing nothing at all. She fired again. "That's it," Byron said. 2 rounds in 20 minutes. "Wind's turning," she said. So I want it on the turn." She wrote something else. "Not before, not after." Byrne did not know what that meant. He told 3 people about it that night anyway, and none of them cared, and he was not able to explain why it had stuck in his head. This small woman spending 20 minutes on 2 rounds, like each one had a name. 9 days later, the drone went down over the valley. It came apart in the air at 13:40 on a Tuesday, and the men in the operations tent watched it happen on a screen. Something on the northern ridge had reached out 1,600 meters and hit a moving aircraft, and that told everyone in the tent a thing they did not want to know. 40 minutes after that, a resupply convoy, 4 vehicles, 11 people, coming up the valley floor road, because it was the only road, went dark on the net. Not silence at first. First there was a voice. A driver named Halloran, calling contact in a pitch that made 2 men in the tent stand up, and then the crack and tear of rounds on steel coming through the handset behind him, and then Halloran again saying they were stopped, saying the lead truck was stopped, saying something else that got cut in half. Then nothing. Adeyemi keyed the handset. Comanche 3, Rel. Say status. Static. Comanche 3, Rel. Any station? Say status. Over. The static had texture to it. It rose and fell like something breathing. 9 men stood in that tent and listened to a sound that meant nothing and could mean anything, and the longer it went, the more each of them filled it in privately with the worst version. Somebody's boot scraped the plywood floor, and it was very loud. 22 seconds. Then a voice, thin and wrong. Rel. Comanche. We're pinned. We're 4 hurt, 1 bad. We can't move. They're on the north ridge. They're on the north. The transmission ended in a noise that was not words. Prosper was already at the map. Quick reaction force. 2 vehicles. We go up the wash and flank. With what overwatch? Adeyemi said. We move fast enough. We don't need... They killed a drone at 1,600 meters. Adeyemi's voice had gone flat. You said it yourself an hour ago. It's a math problem. The tent was quiet. Outside, the generator coughed and steadied. Adeyemi turned his head. Isel Novak was standing in the tent entrance with a clipboard in her left hand, the ammunition count, because she had come to hand it in. She had heard everything. Novak, Adeyemi said. Sir. Your file says you shot a 980 at Benning, under wind. Yes, sir. That was paper. Yes, sir. Adeyemi looked at her for 4 full seconds. He was aware of Prosper's face in his peripheral vision, and he was aware of what he was about to admit in front of the room. And he found that he did not care as much as he'd expected to. I should have read that file in April, he said. That's on me. Can you get onto the south rise and give me eyes on that ridge? Yes, sir. How long? She had already done it in her head. 50 minutes to the seam, 10 to settle, 1 hour. You want a spotter? No, sir. She said it without emphasis. 2 of us on that rise doubles what they can see. I'll call my own. Prosper made a sound. Adeyemi did not look at him. Go. She was moving before the word finished. The south rise was not a rise so much as a broken shoulder of rock that came off the plateau and ran down toward the valley in a series of shale seams. And getting into it meant 50 minutes of controlled falling. She went light. Rifle, 4 magazines, water, a folded card of range data she had built over 4 months of doing nothing but counting ammunition and walking the ground around Rel, because there was nothing else to do. Every terrain feature within 2 kilometers of the outpost was on that card with a number beside it. She got into the seam at 1447 and lay down in it and did not move for 6 minutes. Then she started reading the valley. The convoy was where she'd expected. 4 vehicles strung out along the road. The lead one canted into the ditch, all 4 dead in the water. Muzzle flashes on the north ridge, 3 positions she could confirm, spread across 400 meters of rock. The one that had killed the drone would be the highest and the farthest right. It had a view of everything, 1,140 meters to the near position, 1,420 to the far right one. Crosswind moving left to right, 7, gusting 9, and it was not steady. It came in pulses off the valley mouth, and she watched 3 of them go past and did not touch the rifle. Rel, foxhole! Her voice went out on the net flat and even, and in the operations tent, 8 men turned toward the speaker because none of them had heard it before, and it did not sound like a person who had spent 4 months counting bullets. In position on the south rise. I have 3 firing positions on the north ridge. Sending grids. She sent them. Adeyemi wrote them down. Foxhole, Rel, engage at your discretion. Copy. First round in 40 seconds. She built the shot. 11:40, wind pulsing 7 to 9. And the man in the near position was working a belt-fed weapon from behind a low stack of rock with his shoulders and head exposed above it every time he traversed left. Left, low, she said aloud to nobody. Correction, 1.5 right, she fired. The rifle's report went out flat across the valley and came back off the far wall a beat and a half later, doubled. The man behind the rock stopped traversing. He did not get up. The belt-fed weapon went quiet and stayed quiet, and down on the valley floor, somebody in the third vehicle recognized what had just happened and started shooting again. Rel, Foxhole, 1. The second position took her 90 seconds because he had cover and he was smart about it. He fired 3-round bursts and moved 2 meters between each. She watched him do it 4 times and worked out that he always moved right, because the rock on his left was higher and he had to duck under it. On the 5th burst, she was already looking at where he was going to be. Right on, she said, and fired into the empty space, and he moved into it. 2. The far right position had stopped firing. That was the bad news. It meant he had seen the first 2 positions die, and he was thinking, and a man on a ridge at 1,400 meters who is thinking is a much larger problem than a man who is shooting. He solved it in about 40 seconds. He solved it by shooting at her. The first round came in high and left and struck the shale above her by maybe 2 meters. And the sound of it was a hard, flat crack against rock, and then a hissing shower of stone fragments across her back and the side of her neck. She did not move. She counted. The second round came 4 seconds later, and it was closer, 1.5 meters, low this time, and it punched into the seam floor near her boots and threw grit up under the leg of her trousers. He was bracketing her, high, then low. The third one would split the difference, and the third one would be very close, and she had about 4 seconds to decide what to do with that information. She felt the grit on her neck, the sun on the back of her helmet, the specific cold of the rock through her chest plate. She heard the third report arrive, the sound reaching her a full 3 seconds after the round had already passed, which told her his range to her better than any instrument, because sound is slow and math is not. 1,400. Maybe a hair over. He was in the far right position, and he had not moved to shoot at her, which meant he was confident, which meant he thought she could not reach him. The third round hit 11 inches from her left elbow and filled her mouth with dust. She rolled. Not far, 2 body lengths down the seam to a notch where the shale stepped, and she came up in it and got the rifle onto the ridge and found him in the glass in under 3 seconds because she had already known where he was. He was reloading. He had his head down over the weapon and his upper body against the rock, and he was not looking at where she used to be. He was looking at his hands, and it lasted about 1.5 seconds. Right, on, she said, and fired. The report came back off the wall doubled, and the far right position went dark. And in the operations tent, Captain Adeyemi realized he had been holding a pen so hard the barrel had cracked. Rel, Foxhole, 3. North Ridge is quiet. Move your vehicles. Prosper was standing very still. The quick reaction force went down the wash at speed and reached the convoy in 11 minutes, and it was in those 11 minutes that the rest of them showed up, because 3 men on a ridge had never been the whole of it. And the 12 who came up out of the dry wash on the convoy's southern flank had been waiting for exactly this. They came fast, and they came spread, and they were between the QRF and the vehicles. Icel had them at 900 to 1200 meters, moving across broken ground, and there was no cover for her to shoot from, except the seam she was in, and the far right position she'd cleared had a friend she did not know about yet. Rel, foxhole, 12 plus on the south flank of the convoy, moving north, engaging. She engaged. 900 meters is not a hard shot for what she was doing. 900 meters at a man running across shale is a different problem, and she solved it the way Odile had taught her to solve moving targets, which was to stop thinking about the man and start thinking about the ground. Pick the piece of open rock he has to cross, put the crosshair on it, and let him arrive. She let 3 of them arrive. The 4th one she missed. She called it before she looked. Left. She was left. She corrected and fired, and he did not get up. Rel, foxhole, 7. The QRF was firing now, and the convoy survivors were firing, and the valley had turned into a wall of overlapping noise. The flat crack of her own rifle, the deeper hammering of the QRF's mounted guns, rounds skipping off rock with a sound like something tearing, and under all of it, the thin metallic ring of brass on shale beside her elbow. She was on her 2nd magazine when the round came through the seam. It came from the north ridge, from a position she had not identified, at a bad angle, and it didn't hit her. It hit the rifle's bipod leg and tore it off the receiver and drove the whole weapon sideways into her forearm, hard enough that she felt the bone flex. Everything stopped for a half-second. She lay there with her arm going numb from the elbow down and her rifle bent away from her at an angle it should not have been at. And she heard the 2nd round arrive and hit the seam wall behind her, and the 3rd one went overhead close enough that she felt the pressure of it on the exposed strip of skin between her collar and her helmet. Not sound, pressure, like a hand passing very fast. She saw the shale in front of her face and the grit floating in the light. She heard her own breathing and found it too fast and slowed it. She felt her fingers. They worked, all 4 and the thumb, slow and thick, but they worked. She calculated the angle of the round through the seam meant he was north, northwest, and high, above the 3 she had killed, in a position with a view into her cover, which meant he had been there the whole time and had been waiting for her to be busy. She did what she did. She got the rifle up on a folded pack instead of the bipod, which cost her about 40% of her stability and all of her comfort, and she pushed her numb left forearm under the handguard as a rest and let it hurt. She scanned north-northwest, high, above, there. He was in a fold of rock at 1,300 meters with a rifle, and no idea that she had already found him, and she called it, right, high, on, and fired with a bad rest and a bad arm, and a 9-mile-an-hour pulse of crosswind moving through the middle third of the flight path. And she hit him. Rel, foxhole, 8. North Ridge had a 4th position. It's clear now. In the operations tent, nobody said anything for a moment. Then Byrne, who had no business being in the tent at all, and who had come in to bring water and stayed, said out loud what every single person there was thinking. Who is she? The valley floor took another 19 minutes. She worked the flank as they broke and ran for the wash, and the count climbed, and the QRF closed on the vehicles and started pulling people out. When the last man on the south flank went down at 1,100 meters and nothing moved on any ridge, the number she'd been tracking aloud into the net stood at 19. Rel, foxhole, 19. Valley floor is clear. I'm coming down. Foxhole, Rel? Adeyemi's voice cracked slightly, and he did not care. There's a man in vehicle 2. Our medic is working 3 others. Can you? Moving. She went down the shale seam in 6 minutes on a route that should have taken 20, with a forearm she could not fully close and a rifle with one leg, and she reached the road at 16:02. The man in Vehicle 2 was a staff sergeant named Wilmot Baraka, 34 years old, and he had taken a round through the upper leg and had been putting pressure on it himself for 51 minutes with a hand that had stopped being strong about 40 minutes in. His skin had gone the color of paper. He was still awake, which was the only good thing about the situation. Isel knelt in the door of the vehicle and put her hands where his had been and pressed down. "Hey," Baraka said. His voice came from a long way off. "You the one on the hill?" "Yes." "Okay." He tried to laugh. It didn't work. "Okay." She got the tourniquet high and set it and turned the windlass, and he made a sound, and she kept turning. 2 more turns passed where it hurt. She checked below it, and there was nothing, and she locked it and wrote the time on the strap with a grease pencil from her own kit, because she had carried one for 6 years for a completely different reason. "You a medic?" he said. "No." "You're doing that like a medic." "I read the manual." She checked his eyes. "Twice." Baraka's head went back against the seat. He was quiet for a moment, and then he said, in a completely different voice, small and very clear, "I've got a wife in Fayetteville. We've got a thing planned. In October. Am I going to make October?" Isel Novak did not do reassurance. She had never in her life told a person that something would be fine when she did not know it. She checked the tourniquet, checked his pulse, checked the color coming back into the hand he'd been pressing with, and then she looked at him directly and said 4 words. "You'll make October, Sergeant." Not a hope. A range card. A number she had already run. Baraka closed his eyes, and something in his chest let go, and he started breathing like a man who intended to keep doing it. The medic reached them 90 seconds later and took over, and later told 3 people that whoever had put that tourniquet on had put it on better than he would have. They loaded the wounded. The valley went quiet in the specific way a valley goes quiet after, with the wind coming back and the dust settling on everything, and a smell of hot metal hanging in the air. Isel sat on the running board of Vehicle 3 with her left arm across her knee and let the swelling do what it was going to do, and for about 11 minutes it was over. It was not over. At 16:31, the net came alive again, and this time it was the Outpost calling them. A second element, 20, maybe 25 men, had come around the northern shoulder while the valley was burning, and they had not gone for the convoy at all. They had gone for Rel. And Rel, at that moment, had 31 people in it, most of whom were cooks and mechanics and a water point specialist, because everybody who could fight was 16 kilometers away in a valley. "All stations, Rel. We have contact at the wire, north and northeast. We have," Adeyemi's voice, and then a gap, and then, "we have a vehicle-borne threat on the access road. Repeat, VBIED on the access road. They are moving on the gate." Isel stood up. The access road to Cop Rel came up the plateau in a long dogleg and then straightened for the final 400 meters to the gate, and there was exactly 1 truck on it, an old flatbed running hard, and everyone at Rel who could see it understood what it was. The QRF turned around in the valley and started back, and the math on that was 18 minutes minimum, and the truck was going to reach the gate in about 3. The gate had 2 men on it and a machine gun that was already firing and doing nothing, because the truck's cab and engines block were plated, and because rounds into a truck's front end do not stop a truck that only needs to travel 400 meters. Isel was already climbing. There was a knuckle of rock on the south side of the valley mouth, 900 meters below the outpost and 3 kilometers out from it, and she had walked it in her second month at Rel and put a number on it. From that knuckle, you could see the last stretch of the Rel access road at an angle, sideways, across the whole gap of the valley mouth. 2,010 meters. She had written it on the card in March and had never once expected to use it. She got onto the knuckle at a dead run with a rifle that had no bipod and a left arm that would not close, and she went prone and got the pack under the fore end and found the road in the glass, and the truck was on the dogleg. Rel, Foxhole. I have the access road from the south knuckle. 2,010 meters. Angle is oblique. Say the target. Static. Then a voice she had never heard sound like that. It was Prosper. He had come back from the valley in the lead vehicle of the QRF, and he was 14 minutes out, and he had a radio, and nothing else. And he had watched the truck come around the dogleg on the same feed everyone else was watching. And he did the arithmetic that he had built his entire career on, and the arithmetic came back with a number he could not accept. There were 4 seconds of open net where he did not say anything. Everyone heard those 4 seconds. Foxhole. His voice was wrong, stripped down, all the volume gone out of it. Foxhole, this is Prosper. Send it. There are 31 people behind that gate. A breath. Byron is on the gate. Novak, there are 31 people, and I can't get there, and you're the only... He stopped. He started again, and this time he said her name, and it cost him something audible. Novak, I need you to stop that truck. In the operations tent, a mechanic named Duarte turned and stared at the speaker with his mouth open, because in 4 months he had never once heard Deland Prosper say that woman's name. Copy, Ezel said. 2,010 meters, oblique angle, and a truck doing 60 kilometers an hour, on a straight road toward a gate. The distance was not the problem. She had made 2,000-meter shots on paper, and she knew what the drop was, and she had the number on her card. The problem was that she was not shooting at a truck. Shooting the truck did nothing. The truck was plated across the cab, and the engine and the wheels were the wrong target because a blown tire on a straight road at 60 kilometers an hour still arrives at the gate, just crooked. The problem was that she needed the driver, and the driver was behind plate. And the only piece of him available was the windscreen slot, a horizontal gap in the plating about 20 centimeters tall, and at 2,000 meters, and at an oblique angle, that gap was not 20 centimeters. Foreshortened by the angle, it was effectively about 9 centimeters at 2 kilometers, on a target closing at 60 kilometers an hour, with a rifle balanced on a pack because its bipod was gone, and an arm that had a hairline in it she did not know about yet. And the road was straight, which meant the truck was not crossing her. It was moving almost directly away along her line of sight, which sounded easier, and was not, because a target moving away means the range is changing by 17 meters every single second of a flight time that was going to be over 3 seconds. She had to shoot at where the truck would be in 3.5 seconds, and the slot she was aiming at was 9 centimeters tall. Foxhole, 300 meters to gate, someone said. She let it go past. She was not going to take that shot, because there was one other thing on that road, and she had put it on her card in March along with the range, and she had written beside it a single word: culvert. 340 meters short of the gate, the access road crossed a drainage culvert where the plateau shed water in the spring, and the road narrowed there, and the shoulder on the north side dropped away 4 meters into the wash. She had walked it. She had noted it because she noted everything. And she knew, because she had watched every vehicle at Rel come up that road for 4 months, that trucks slowed at the culvert. Every single one. Not much. But the road pitched up, and the surface changed, and even a man driving a bomb slows for half a second at a bad culvert, because your hands do it before your head can stop them. Half a second at the culvert. And the culvert had a lip that would tilt the truck's nose up, and a truck with its nose tilted up shows more of its windscreen slot to a shooter positioned below it on the valley side. 9 centimeters becomes maybe 14 for half a second, at a fixed and known range of 1,970 meters, because she knew where the culvert was to the meter. She built it in her head in the time it took the truck to travel 120 meters. She set the elevation for 1970. She read the wind across the valley mouth, 5 to 6, quartering, less than it had been in the seam because the mouth funneled it differently, and she took a hold of a little over a meter into it. She dug her numb left forearm under the forend and made herself a rest out of a limb she could not feel and pressed it down into the rock. Rel, foxhole, I'm taking him at the culvert. Say again, the culvert. She put the crosshair not on the truck, but on the piece of road 340 meters short of the gate, on the near lip of the culvert, and she held it there while the truck came into the bottom of her glass. She called it aloud, alone on a rock 2 kilometers from anyone. Center, on. The truck reached the culvert, and its nose came up, and its driver's hands did what every driver's hands do, and for half a second the flatbed hung on the lip with its windscreen slot tilted skyward, and its speed bleeding. And the round that had left Novak's rifle 3¼ seconds earlier arrived. The truck did not explode. That is the part people get wrong when they tell it afterward. It simply stopped steering. It went off the north shoulder at the culvert, dropped 4 meters into the wash, and came to rest on its side 340 meters short of the gate, with its engine still running, and nobody at Rel touched it for 6 hours until the disposal team came out from the airfield and confirmed what was in the back, which was enough to have taken the gate and most of the buildings behind it. On the gate, Specialist Toma Byrne lay flat on his stomach with his hands over his head for 11 full seconds before he understood that nothing had happened. Then he got up and looked out across the valley mouth at 3 kilometers of empty air, at the low knuckle of rock on the far side that he could barely make out, and he said to nobody, no. They did not believe it. That is the honest part of this story. When the QRF came up the road at 1704 and saw the truck in the wash, the first assumption in 3 separate vehicles was that the gate gun had gotten lucky, and when the gate gunners said it wasn't them, the second assumption was that the driver had lost control at the culvert on his own. A staff sergeant named Odom said out loud in front of 9 people that there was no such thing as a 2,000-meter shot into a truck cab, and anybody claiming one was building a story. It took 3 days and 4 separate things to settle it. The first was the truck itself. The disposal team, working the wreck before they cleared the load, photographed a single entry through the windscreen slot on the driver's side, high and slightly right, with the deformation pattern of a round that had come in at a steep oblique from below and to the south. They logged it because they log everything. The angle was not survivable as a coincidence. The second was the Outpost's own perimeter camera, which had been pointed down the access road for 8 months for exactly no reason, and which recorded, at 19 frames per second, the truck's nose coming up on the culvert lip and the windscreen slot going dark in a single frame. The third was the timestamp. The camera clock and the operations tent's radio log were both synced to the same source, and the radio log had Icel Novak's transmission, "I'm taking him at the culvert," logged at 16:38:51. The camera had the frame at 16:38:57. 6 seconds. Which is what it takes to settle a rifle and break a shot at a piece of road you have already decided on. The fourth was Odile Fanucci, indirectly, because when the investigating officer from the airfield asked Icel how she had known the truck would slow, she told him she had walked the culvert in March and written it on a card, and she produced the card, and on the card in pencil, dated 4 months earlier, was the number 1970 and the word culvert and the note, "All vehicles slow here." Odom, who had said it was a story, read the card and handed it back and did not say anything at all. Prosper came to find her on the fourth evening. She was sitting on an ammunition crate outside the Conex box she had spent 4 months inside of, with her left forearm in a splint she had refused twice before accepting, and the sun was going down over the plateau the way it did, turning everything the color of a struck match. He stood in front of her for a while. He was not a man who had ever had trouble filling a silence, and he could not fill this one. "I've been trying to work out how to do this," he said finally. "You don't have to." "I do." He looked at the ground. His hands were open at his sides, and he did not seem to know what to do with them. "I do have to. Because He stopped, started again. "When I said nobody comes back from that valley, I was right about the valley, and I was—" He shook his head sharply, angry at himself. And the anger was not performance. "That's not it. That's not what I need to say. What I need to say is that I stood in a room, and I made it easy for everybody else to not look at you. That's the thing, not the jokes. The jokes were, anybody can do jokes. I made it easy for a whole outpost to not look at you. And I did it on purpose. And it worked. And it worked for 4 months." His voice had gone somewhere else. He stopped and got it back. "And then I sat in a truck 14 minutes, out with 31 people behind that gate, and my mouth full of every reason it couldn't be done. And I had to get on a net in front of everyone and ask you." He looked up. His eyes were wet, and he did not wipe them. "I've been doing this 19 years. I've never had to say a name I hadn't earned the right to say. That's what that was. That's what it cost." Icel Novak looked at him. "I'm not asking you to accept it," Prosper said. "I'm telling you it's mine." She let 3 seconds go by. "Heard, Sergeant," she said. 2 words. The same 2 she had given every time he'd walked past the Conex box with a joke on his lips. "Heard, Sergeant." Flat and empty every time. A door closing. This time she said them differently. Not warmly, just with the door open. Prosper nodded once, hard, and could not speak, and left. Captain Yadayemi found her 10 minutes later, and he did not make a ceremony of it. "The airfield wants you," he said. "Precision element. They're standing one up, and they asked for you by name, off the incident report." He paused. "I want to be clear that I'm not giving you anything. I sat on your file for 4 months. This is just me stopping." "Yes, sir." "You'll have your own element inside a year. Take it." "Yes, sir." He put his hand out, and she shook it, and that was the whole of it, and it was enough. Byrne came by later, with 2 cups of coffee he had no authority to be carrying, and gave her one without asking. 19, he said. "In the valley. That's what the log says. 19. 19, she agreed. Plus the truck. The truck's separate. Yeah. He sat down on the crate next to her, uninvited, and looked out at the darkening plateau. And he was 19 years old and had no filter, and so he said the true thing without dressing it. I was on the gate. I had my hands over my head. I was thinking about my mom. He turned the cup around. You know what nobody said out loud? 31. There's 31 of us who ate dinner tonight. I keep doing that. I keep counting the chow line. Giselle Novak said nothing for a moment. Then she said the only thing she had ever really believed. The thing Odile had spent 6 years hammering into her hands with no philosophy attached to it at all. 400 rounds a week for 6 years, she said. That's all it is? You build a thing on the bad days, so it's there on the worst one? Byrne thought about that. That's not very inspirational, he said. No. She drank her coffee. It's better. She left Rel 11 days later on a resupply bird in the morning with her arm out of the splint and her rifle rebuilt and her card of ranges folded in her breast pocket, the one with Culvert on it in March pencil. Wilmot Baraka, made October. He sent a photograph to the outpost that Byrne pinned to the plywood wall of the operations tent, and Adeyemi left it there for the rest of the deployment. And in a briefing room on the far side of the plateau, 400 kilometers away, a man who had lost 25 fighters and a truck in a single afternoon stood in front of his own map, with his hands flat on the table, and told the men in front of him that there was a shooter on that plateau who could reach the access road from the valley mouth, and that no one should ever again treat that ground as crossable. He said it with absolute certainty, the way men say things in briefing rooms. He was wrong about one thing. He said there was a team. Giselle Novak sat by the window of the helicopter with her hands folded in her lap, small and unremarkable and entirely still, watching the plateau go by underneath, and did not move at all.